Good morning. We're here for another episode of And the Question Is. The question is this morning the courage of the courier. What a blessing it is. We're on location this morning here in Montgomery with Viola Bradford, who is a reporter with the Southern Courier, a living legend in her own right because of the monumental contribution that she made to the civil rights movement, her and her colleagues, in bringing those stories to us because those stories were not available to us. Welcome this morning.
Thank you so very much, Brother Morgan, for having me.
First question that I have this morning is what's in the name? The name was the Southern Courier, but after the work that you all did, the mantra was put on your name, the courage of the courier. Talk a little bit about how much courage it took for you all to do the work that you were doing.
Well, we found out that in the South, the major white controlled papers were not covering the black community or people of color and poor people, pretty much, and particularly people of color. And because of the desegregation and a lot of things that were going on in the black community, someone said they needed to cover what was going on so it could highlight what was going on in our community. So I was like 14 years old, and this Jeff Cowan, who's a law student at Yale, called to me, and Jim Pepler, who's a photojournalist from Pennsylvania, called to me and said they wanted to start a newspaper here. And they heard I could write, so they came to visit me, and they asked me if we could. So we ended up having a workshop at Tuskegee with Ralph McGee. Ralph McGee was a publisher of the Atlanta Journal at the time. Mm-hmm. And I was like I said, the youngest one. And Tuskegee let us have that workshop at Kellogg. So we ended up talking about what we had to do, the process of writing, the counties we had to cover. And so we did Mississippi, at Georgia, and Alabama. The courage had to come because we knew there were a lot of racist people. The Klan was active, and political figures were racist. Police, sheriff, everybody. And going into those counties and into those cities, we were going to face opposition. Like I said, the Courier, we were called communists, and but it did not stop us from reporting the news. At that time, the Montgomery Advertiser, Alabama Journal, was publishing, and the only thing they did to publish the Negro community here in Montgomery was they had a one-page called the Negro page. One time, one of the printers accidentally left a writing at the top that said nigger page. But on that one page, they covered everything, nothing significant about the black community in terms of politics and education. Mm-hmm. It was fluff, like obituaries and sports, only for Carver and Booker T. Washington, church news, society stuff, and all that crap. And they used the editor, the woman who was the editor of it happened to be the receptionist at the black receptionist at Montgomery Advertising. So they made her the editor. She could speak English, and right. She was subject verb agreement. So, and then of course they had the thing. So everything was on one page, and that was not sufficient.
When we talk about the courage of the courier, violence was not just real, but it was you all's reality. You were parachuted into some places that a lot of people would not have been able to withstand. But you all went in with the courage of understanding that journalism and a free press had a place here to be able to bring this story to the masses.
Yes, because there were some stories that if we did not cover them, they wouldn't have been. You wouldn't have been knowing what was going on, particularly with school desegregation stories. One time I was assigned to do a woman whose son had been shot by a state trooper. Mm-hmm. And Mike asked me to go interview the mother, and I went to her. She didn't even know he had been killed.
Oh, wow.
So I was the one who had to tell her the news about that. Wow. Instead of get her reaction right then and there. So we uncovered a whole lot of things that were going on, particularly as it relates to discrimination. Discrimination.
Do me a favor. Take me back to, for 3 years, 1965 to 1968. You all did some great work. Take me back to that period. How you all got started. What were some of the obstacles you had to overcome, and how proud you guys were of the work that you were producing?
Well, as I said, we did start by having a workshop with Ralph McGill, and from there we were assigned to different places in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia. And the only problems we would have would be if if people wouldn't let us into certain places to do it. Sometimes, but we just had to tell them we were with the press and so forth, so we could go into these places. The courthouse with Frank Johnson, I remember going there for desegregation cases and things like that. I remember covering the Klan March up in Anniston one time. Drove up to Anniston, Alabama. They had the Klan marching that time, and you kind of fear, but you don't. But you got a job to do,
You got a job to do.
so you don't fear.
Right.
God has not given us a spirit of fear.
Amen.
And that has always been a part of me. So
Right.
that's why I do what I do. But I remember going up there, being objective, doing what I was supposed to do, cover the children who were marching with hoods, everybody just Klan everywhere. But you just don't think about what's going on at that moment except the job that you got to do.
Right.
So there's no fear.
Right.
We just got a job to do, and that's what I've done. Even when I was in Houston, Texas. I was working for Newsweek in Houston, Texas, and Mike, the editor, called me and said he wanted me to cover George Wallace's presidential campaign, and I ended up covering that campaign. I went there to get credentials so I could get into the gala, the dinner that he was speaking at, and the man said I had to get all kinds of proof, and I'm the only female, the only black person that was in the press corps. They didn't want to give me a pass to get in, a press pass. So they had to call Mike. They called Mike, the editor, and then they finally called me over there and said, here's your pass. And the statement was, we don't know if you came to blow us up. Then he gives me the press pass. And I ended up going to covering that dinner. So I go into this big hall where there's nothing but white people. We're talking about Houston, Texas. What year that was that George Wallace was running? I can't remember the year.
Yeah.
60s, late 60s.
Right.
And I remember this woman a white woman sat, when I sat down at the table, this woman turned around and looked at me the whole dinner. She wouldn't even eat her food. She turned around and she just looked at me the whole time. I was not intimidated. I guess I was supposed to be intimidated. And so I went on and did what I had to do, covered my story, took notes. Then afterwards I remember standing in line too, and I was, like I said, I was only black and only female. And so a woman came past me and she said, I'm glad you got a mind just like Joe Louis. She thought I was there to support George Wallace. I said, child, please. So I ended up that night going to cover because he was speaking to a Klan rally also outside of Houston.
Wow.
And so I went there and I asked one of the guys from AP, I think, can I ride with him? He said, sure. So we rode. And I remember covering the Klan rally. They were burning crosses and everything.
Talk about the intestinal fortitude it takes to be able to be the only black in the room, the only black to cover a story, the black reporter that goes to the Klan rally, and you stick out like a sore thumb.
Well, I had work to do. And see, and I grew up in as an 8-year-old. I was at the mass meeting at my uncle's church, Holt Street Baptist Church, seeing all these people and what kind of courage. And I was never scared of anything, and I was always curious, not nosy, but I was very curious. And I remember doing that. And E.D. Nixon is my cousin, and I used to talk and interview him. He lived a block over from our house, and so I was never afraid of anything, and I ended up going. Fear, I had no fear. I had a purpose, and I understood that at an early age. For some reason, I guess God just gave me that.
Talk to me a little bit, if you will, because I don't know how many people know you are a minister.
Yes, I'm an ordained Baptist minister.
You're an ordained Baptist minister. Take me back to, there was an evening where you and your photographer were supposed to be coming back to Montgomery, I think it was, and something in your spirit said, don't go with him.
Mike had sent me to to cover Stokely the first time he got, well, he had been in jail because he had supposedly launched at the mayor of Selma, Smitherman. And so he had been in jail. So Mike said, I want you to go over to Selma and cover him when he gets out of jail. So I went over to Selma, Alabama, and talked with him. He and all his guys from SNCC, because SNCC was there at the time. And we ended up interviewing him and talking with him. So that's how I got to know Stokely. And then afterwards, Mike said, I want you to go cover his trial. He had been released from jail, but he still had to have a trial. And he became his own lawyer. And I remember going into the courtroom in Selma, Alabama. And he was at this table. I'm sitting right here and covering. But he kept saying things to me, and I'd say something to him, and we would just laugh. And we're in the courtroom now, right? Till the judge said, okay, I'm going to charge both of y'all with contempt if you don't stop talking to each other. So after it was over, Mike said, Jim said, let's go to the back of the building when they let him out of jail this time, because they did arrest him again that time and took him to the back. He said, because I think the Klan might be back there. So I remember Jeff and Jim and I went to the back of the courthouse in Selma, and there were white men just lined up, but they didn't do anything because Jim had his camera. We ended up going, and Jeff and Jim, Stokely was having a press conference across the street at the time at Don Jetelnik's office. Don Jetelnik was a lawyer that came down from New York, but they didn't want to let him practice. So that's how Stokely ended up being his own lawyer. But we had covered also the November 1966. I graduated from high school at Courier in 1966, so I was free because Alabama wouldn't let me in, neither did Alabama State to go to school. So I was free that from September to January. So Mike said, while you're free, we want you to cover Troy, Alabama, in the 10 counties around there. But anyway, so covering that area in the Black Belt for the voting in November 1966, I ended up going there with 3 guys from a New York television station. The 3 guys were in the back of the car. I was in the front, and we covered Stokely that whole day, from sun up to sundown. We had met a guy like at 6 o'clock in the morning, a blind man, 85 years old, had never registered to vote before. Wow. This is in Lowndes County.
Yeah.
And we ended up covering him. And he was sitting on the porch waiting for us. And so we went from pole to pole to pole to pole, just trying to see what was going on. Well, later on that night, we thought the blacks were winning, but the tides were turning. And we found out that one guy whose daughter had integrated to school, had gone to register to vote that day, and some white men beat him up, split his skull. But the people were chasing us. We thought chasing us were Klan, but they were not. They were Stokely's people telling him that the guy had been beaten. Mm-hmm. So they ended up going, and at this time, he took me back to me and the crew from New York, back to the Freedom House, where the results were coming in from the vote that day. And that's when he introduced me to Charles Hamilton, Dr. Charles Hamilton out of Chicago, who was writing that book, Black Power. Mm-hmm. And they were working on the book at the time. But my mind was not on the book in talking to Dr. Charles Hamilton. I wanted to find out why Stokely was going, because I saw they were getting ready to retaliate against the men that beat his men. Right. Jim was there, so Jim came, and I could not go, but I remember their guys getting on the back of a pickup truck with shotguns. And I wanted to go, because I'm a reporter. I'm supposed to be there to see that. Mm-hmm. And they physically took me back into the house. But Jim went. Right. And then after it was over, Jim came and he said, well, I'm going back to Montgomery. If you want to go, you ride back with me. And I said, Jim, I don't think that's going to be a good idea. Mm-hmm. And I did, because the Klan ended up running Jim. He had a blue Volkswagen. running him off the road and taking his film and just exposing it. But he was alive, so that's why I said, okay, Jim, if I had been riding with you, it would have been a different story.
Right.
But we had no fear. We just did what we had to do.
Which is the courage of
The courage of the Courier. And when the Courier folded and after 40 years, it was the editorial in the Montgomery Advertiser that was the headline was "The Courage of the Courier."
Wow.
Yeah, because when we first started, the first issue had a paper for the people. Our editorial was a paper for the people.
Right.
And the people, they read our papers. They're all over the state. Everybody, black, white, everybody was reading our state. And people in the poor neighborhoods were reading because they would never seen themselves in the news.
Right.
Right. So it's all kinds. We covered just everything that had to do with social justice.
Wow. The courage of the Courier. When we come back, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we want to talk about the power of journalism. Stay with us. We'll be back in a second. And we're back. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
You are a wealth, a reservoir of information. I firmly believe it's hard to pour out of an empty cup, but your cup full. Yeah. And we thank you so much for pouring out today, because I'll be honest with you, the whole idea of this platform is to make people smarter, and you've made us smarter this morning. Now what we want to talk about is the power of journalism. Just talk about, like you were talking about the fact that Jim had his camera with him, when y'all were in behind the courthouse. Just the power of journalism has a tendency to reframe how people see it, because of the simple fact, when people nationally started to see the images coming out of Montgomery, Alabama, when they started to see the images of the freedom rides and all of those things and how people were being beaten in Birmingham, and the reporting that you guys were doing in Montgomery, in Selma, in Troy, it reframed how people saw the civil rights movement. How did that make you feel?
It made me feel like we were really contributing to not only race relations, but exposing injustice in the community that were people of color, like I said, and people who were poor. Now, journalism is very important to me, because if we didn't do some of the stories that we did, it would not be known. It's like our paper and Jim's camera was like the cell phones of today, where you're capturing the events. Otherwise, people ain't gonna believe it.
Right.
They don't believe it. But we had to. We were very courageous, and I remember going to Tuskegee after I left Courier and came back some years ago to teach journalism here at Alabama State. I was hired also as a producer director for public television out of Auburn University, and I was still covering black affairs, letting people know what's happening in the black community. And I remember Danny Williams was the archivist at Tuskegee. And I would go over there to try to get stories from the Courier, because when we folded, the Courier, all our files were put at Tuskegee. And he said every month the FBI would come to get the Courier, because they thought we were communists.
Wow.
We didn't care.
Right.
We had a job to do. And so evidently we were doing something that they thought was threatening to their establishment. And so they would come and call us whatever they called us and so forth. But they always tried to get the Courier. We were called names, negative things that was going on. I was covering a case of a state trooper in Selma, I remember, and I went across the street during the recess of the court, and I saw the black people looking at me like I was crazy. And I ended up sitting at the counter, and then that's when the lady came to me. She said, "We don't serve niggers." And I said, "Oh," I said, "but it's 1960. The Civil Rights Bill has passed. What are you talking about?" And she said she didn't give a damn. So she called this man named Walter. I said, "Now who's Walter?" And a big dude comes, like a bouncer.
Yeah.
He's getting ready to physically throw me out of the store. But I encouraged that, and I remember covering when I was a bureau chief for the Courier in Troy, Alabama. I had gone there because it was integrated, it was segregated at that time, and I could not live in any hotel because it was segregated. So I lived at a funeral home. Mrs. Grubbs, Michael, the editor, arranged for me to stay there, and so while I was there, I ended up covering 10 counties that were around there. And I remember the first day Ellen, who was one of the founders of the paper, was leaving, going back to Radcliffe, and her fiance Peter was going back to Harvard. So I got selected, and here I am, like 18 now, 18 years old. So I became the bureau chief for 10 counties. And you wonder why wasn't I in school? Because University of Alabama wouldn't let me in,
Right.
and neither did Alabama State.
Right.
So I was out. So I was there free to work on the paper.
Right.
And we ended up going to a restaurant, and a waitress came over. So Ellen said, "I'm gonna take you around Troy so you can see what's going on and introduce you to some of the people." So we're sitting in this restaurant, and the lady comes and tells Ellen, "I'll serve you, but I'm not gonna serve her." And so Ellen said, "If you can't serve her, I'm not gonna eat here." And during that time, if black folks wanted something to eat, you'd have to go to the window in the back of the place. It's like McDonald's now. I wish I had invented that. And they'd hand you the food through the window. And so we ended up leaving. Then this is within 30 minutes, and we went to a second place, and we were going to the door, and it said open, and the man closed, pulled the curtain down. We went to the third restaurant. And so I said, "Oh, well, we'll just eat here." And there were chairs over here, a place to eat, and it was like a board, like McDonald's got now, that you could order your food. I said, "Oh, well, we could just get some food in here. We could just sit here and eat, Ellen." And so the man came and he said, "We don't have no food." I said, "Okay." I said, "All right then, okay." So we ended up going to one of the community leaders' house, or one of the main leaders in the community. I cannot think of her name, but she ended up cooking fried chicken, ham, greens, potato salad, macaroni, cheese. I mean, we had the whole food there that night. But we just never got afraid. We just still did what we had to do. She left me there, and I still went to do what I had to do there in Troy, in those counties right there.
Talk about the impact that those heroes and sheroes during the civil rights movement played in helping you all. Like, two names that readily come to mind is Clifford and Virginia Durr, who had like a house that the new reporters, when they would come in, would be able to stay there. There were other people who, helped fuel you guys being able to put the episodes in the paper out to financially furnish what you guys were doing, because there was a vacuum there. There was no reporting. There was no objective reporting that was happening during that time, and you guys filled that void. But there were some heroes and sheroes that helped you guys be able to fill that void.
Yeah, Clifford and Virginia Durr was kind to open his home to Jeff, the guy who did the presentation with me, and to Jim, their home. And I got to meet her because she would give dinners sometimes, and I'm like 17 years old, like 18. And she would invite me to the dinner because I was a member of the staff. She was very kind and very supportive of the Courier by housing them here on Felder in Montgomery. And also they had a property called P Level, and we would go there sometimes. And Mike, when I remember going to Mike's house, Mike and his family wife lived in Montgomery. I don't know what street it was here, but he invited us to dinner one time, and I went there. And all the neighbors on his street, he left the door wide open. They had never seen black and white people eat together before.
Wow.
So they went, and all his neighbors came and stood in his yard and on the sidewalk. And he left the door open, and we just ate. And they stood out there near his porch the whole time while we were eating our meal.
Wow.
But we weren't afraid, but we left the door open, so here, you could see what's going on.
Wow.
Like that. We also had Malden. Malden, who was Dr. King's barber.
Yes.
One of the most supportive businessmen that we had. Not only did he advertise in our newspaper, the paper was but 10 cents.
Right.
Not only did he advertise in the paper, but he also sold the paper from his business. And we had support from local black small businesses like that to support us. And we appreciate that.
One of the things that I want to talk about is a tactic that the segregationists used against journalists that didn't work. It worked for a minute, and that was what happened would be they tried to utilize the libel laws. They basically would say that if the reporter was reporting a story, that you somehow slandered my name. And so what they did was they went after SCLC. They went after Dr. King and they sued Dr. King. They sued the movement per se to try and strip it. They sued the New York Times. And there was a groundbreaking ruling called New York Times versus Sullivan. Sullivan was the police commissioner in Montgomery and basically had turned a blind eye to people being beaten during the civil rights movement. And he was the litigant in this case.
Right.
And Bull Connor, others who looked at it, they said, okay, we're going to sue the people in the civil rights, the dignitaries in the civil rights movement. That's how we'll strip them of their financial value. They won, but it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. They overturned it because the lawyer who was arguing said that reporters should be able to report effectively about governmental entities and people in the government and can't be held liable. So what happens is that was a major turning point, because at that point it was towards the end of the Courier, because the New York Times had pulled all of their people out because the New York Times was about to go under. You guys filled that void. And so towards the end of the Courier, now we started to see reporters, because of this ruling, start to come in and report on bigger situations.
I think what a lot of the people here, particularly those officials and sheriff and police, didn't understand, most of the people who came down for the Courier were lawyers. They were law students from Harvard and Yale and Radcliffe. They were law students. They knew the law.
Right.
And also, we also knew what that Sullivan, New York case was all about.
Right.
You're a public figure. You can be, we could report on you.
Right.
And say what you need to say. So there's not going to be a libel case against us. So that we knew that we were not ignorant people. You know, people have a certain tendency to just, if you don't have the information and the knowledge, they try to pull anything over.
How important was that to you guys, being able to confront some of the obstacles that you would come up against? Because it was a situation where they would take a hard line as though you didn't know the law. How important is it for journalists to make sure that they know their rights and responsibilities?
Well, I'm having a problem with current communications right now in journalism today, because I don't know what's being taught in the journalism classes.
Right.
But I had talked to some students that they tried to get me to be over communications down at a college down in Florida. I flew down there, and I was beautiful studio, everything, and I was going to head that communications department. And I was asking the students, just talking to the students, oh, you major in journalism. But what I saw, I sat in a class, but what I saw was, what is this? They would say and even I'm not going to name the school here, but I talked to some students here. And I'm finding out they were not teaching reading, research, making sure you're up on your game before you interview somebody.
Right.
See what I mean? So, so they say, well, no, I want to be in public relations. But I found most people want to be in public relations, do that video on the new social media platform, stuff like that. But to me, that's not journalism.
Agreed.
Journalism that you got to go tell the story.
Agreed.
You got to do research, tell the story. And I'm mad at the national commentators that I see sometime in the news, people I see on TV today nationally, that let people get away with a lie.
Yes.
Or let people get away with not answering the question. See, I'm taught as a journalist, first of all, you don't ask a question with a yes or no answer. You got to frame it so they can give you information, but you also need to know that information so you know whether they're lying or not.
Exactly.
Because right now, and I'm mad with the national media over the last 3 or 4 years because they're not doing that. These are neophytes. They just want to get the interview.
Talk to me a little bit. How do you think the 24-hour news cycle has diluted journalism? Also, how has social media as a whole diluted journalism? Because of the simple fact, with the 24-hour news cycle, you got to feel something. So now it's more opinionated. I'm going to give you my opinion, whereabout we deal in facts. And we fair and we're balanced in how a lot of people get upset with journalists because they want to tell one side of the story. No, we tell both sides of the story.
And we tell the truth. See,
We tell the truth.
that's what we got to get at. We got to get at telling the truth. And my problem is, I watch, like I've been watching CNN, MSNBC, whatever the station is, I go back and forth, and I'm always getting the commentary, but I'm also getting news reports. And they're just quick sound bites with no kind of explanation, no substance that much.
Right.
And like I said, you let people get away with lying to you. And you should know that when they're lying to you, you should fact check.
The name of the newspaper that you guys were given was The Courage of the Courier. I don't see a whole lot of courage in journalism today.
Because people, I think they're afraid that that person, because they're so well known, won't give you an interview the next time, or they'll block you from the press corps. And they have some certain fears. Why? I don't know. That is you got the three levels of government supposed to be check and balance. And we always call the journalism, the press, the fourth estate, which was just as equal as judicial, legislative, and the press and executive. So, but that level is not. I don't see it there anymore. I don't know if they're scared to ask the questions, or don't want to tell somebody that, ma'am or sir, that's not true. They're getting to do it more now, even on the national scene. But locally, I don't deal with local, because every once in a while I try to. Oh, I should say that because you would WSC.
That's okay. Listen, on this podcast, we're forthright and we're honest.
Okay.
We're forthright and we're honest. I mean, the reality is this. When we come to a point, history is going to require an answer from us.
Yes.
About what did we do at the inflection point in history, and history will require an answer from us. And so we were put in a time such as this, for a time such as this.
We're not journalists because we want to be TV stars.
Right.
Or we want to be a personality.
Right.
And that's what it has become over so many years.
Right.
And they determine to put you on TV depending on what you look like, I guess. But you have to do the work, do the research, and call people out when they're calling people out. And I just have not seen that. And they want to become. It's not a money-making business, okay?
Right.
So what are you in there for? To be a journalist? Why do you want to be one?
And I think you have to ask the question, because of the funding mechanism of journalism.
Yeah.
The funding mechanism of journalism it's funded through advertisers.
Yes.
And so then effectively, from an ethical standpoint, you have to have the support of the powers that be to say, hey, we're going to do what's right, regardless of who the advertiser may be. Just because you may be advertising with us, if there's something that's going on that needs reporting, we're going to report it.
Exactly.
And I think that's where the line is drawn.
They're afraid that advertisers won't be,
right.
I know that's it. So you have your young people getting these new so-called news from these sound bites like this, quick sound bites, but it's not the whole story.
Right.
So that's what I'm having a problem with right now.
So then when we talk about where we are in history right now, when we talk about capital J journalism and being able to do journalism the right way, there has to be some training that happens.
Yes.
How do we train this next generation of reporters, photographers, editors? And I'm not talking about video editors. I'm talking about editors at newspapers, because one of the issues I have a serious problem with is newspapers didn't know how to handle the pandemic. Newspapers didn't know how to handle the digital age. There's a lot of great journalism, but it's behind paywalls.
Do you know, when I was in journalism school at the University of Arizona, like I said, it's all in the teaching of journalism too. I remember my professor, Mr. Carson, it was an autumn, I don't care how well you wrote the story, and this may sound minute and kind of trite, but it works. I don't care how well you wrote the story. If you misspell somebody's name, it was an automatic D. If you got a fact incorrect, I don't care how well the story was written, it was an automatic F.
Right.
So what does that tell you? It tells you that you've got to be more in depth on what you're doing, knowing you're telling the truth, writing what is the truth, and I'm getting back to that truth thing, and just being accurate and professional about what you do.
Right.
You see,
Right.
so if he's not gonna let me get by with that misspelled word or that fact that's incorrect, I got to be on my P's and Q's to know I've got to get the truth out, and it's got to be well written. And I don't know I just don't know what's going on right now.
Well, I think we've gotten lackadaisical. I think there is a certain amount of laziness from an accountability standpoint, because it begs the question, where does accountability come from? It comes from within oneself. It comes from within oneself. And so what happens is you got to be willing. I can remember being in J school. I can remember being in journalism school. There are kids now who are majoring in journalism. We would have to take a current events test every day to know what's going on from a current events. You cannot effectively tell a story if you don't know the story.
Which means you got to read.
You got to read. You got to research.
Read and research.
You got to read and research, and then you got to be able to write.
Yeah, that always helps.
You got to be able to write, because no longer do we have one-trick ponies. Now you got to be able to do it all. Or to be effective in it, you have to know how to do it all. And I think that's just where we've kind of lost it in translation. Listen, everything that you guys brought to the table during the time that you were reporting for the Southern Courier, not only did you fill a void, but you gave so much emphasis and encouragement for people like myself to see people who look like them giving the news. For you to be 14 years old, 18 years old, and to grow up in the business and knew that you had met your calling, how important was that to you to know what your purpose was and to feel your purpose?
You know what? I'm going to take the example that I had in the 10th grade in the English class at Carver High School. And I wrote this paper. I was up all night writing this paper for my English teacher. And when I gave it to him the next day, I think this is an incentive too for me to go into writing too. So I ended up giving him my paper the next day. When he gave it back to me, he gave me an F.
Wow.
And I was devastated. And I went to him and I said, "Why would I get an F on this paper? I knew it was a well-written paper." You know what he told me? He said, "Because you didn't write that paper." I said, "I wrote that paper." He said, "No, you didn't. Sounds like a white girl wrote that paper." And I'm going, wow. So black girls are not supposed to be writing well and been writing at all. And so all you have to do is treat me bad like that, and that just propels me.
It fuels you.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So you were well fueled during the civil rights movement.
Oh yeah. We talking about I'm 50 years old. I'm in the movement. I'm with MIA every day after school, and the Southern Courier after school. SLC had come in by that time, and I was doing voter registration door to door. I was working on a newspaper, doing what we had to do there. And on weekends, I was doing what I had to do. On Saturdays, going door to door. So I was just really entrenched and trying to do the right thing.
Right.
And so,
looked like you did it.
I did the best I could.
1965 to 1968. That's how long the Courier went.
That's right. We had gotten foundation money from Ford Foundation, and and people would just give us money, and then I think Mike just got tired of trying to get the money to sustain, and so it just it folded after 3 years.
177 issues. 170. That's a lot of work that you all did.
Yes, whether we were here or not. Even when I was in Arizona and outside going to school, I still would send articles back to the Courier, even when I was studying journalism at Arizona.
Wow. Wow. Listen, stay with us. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back, and we're going to do a 2-minute drill, and we're going to get out of here. What a blessing it's been to talk to you today. Listen, you have put us in a time portal and transferred us back to 1965 and 1968. It's been a blessing to talk to you. Stay with us. We'll be back in a second. So real quick, we're getting ready to close out.
Okay.
I want to thank you. Just talk briefly about how did it feel, full circle moment, to be in the interpretive center. You got a chance to be back with your team that you were with, and y'all had a conversation. How did that make you feel?
Awesome. Not only that, but it solidified my desire to do something like the Courier again. Really, that's when I moved back here in 2015. Really, the Lord told me to move back here, and He told me, I said, why am I moving back to Montgomery? He used the word reconciliation.
Wow.
I was in prayer meeting at my church. Walter Fontroy was a congressman. That was my pastor and my boss because I worked for him in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Okay.
And so I came back in and I said, okay. He said, start the newspaper, Reconciliation. So you could do those stories that the Courier used to do. So it makes me feel like empowered now to do that. And the circumstances that's going on right now. And I want to revive like that and get students to do the same and teach students, journalism students, what we had when we were working for the Courier. That's what I want to do.
It very much feels like we're marching back towards that same environment, that same climate
Exactly.
that we were dealing with, and we're going to need strong journalists who have the courage of the Courier,
Have no fear.
who have no fear to be able to stand and report the stories that are going to help people. Thank you so much for joining us. You are a jewel.
Let me tell you 3 things I did a Martin Luther King speech I had to give last Friday.
Yes,
and I
ma'am.
tell people now, that's my mantra now for 2025. 3 things. Tell the truth. Accept God. Don't fear nobody. And I tell the women at the prison, do what you have to do what you have to do, as long as it's legal and moral.
Do what you have to do what you have to do.
As long as it's legal and moral.
As long as it's legal and more. Listen, thank you all for joining us. Ms. Bradford, thank you so much.
Thank you.
May God bless you. May God keep you. Listen, this is another episode of And the Question Is. The question is the courage of the Courier. Hey, stay with us. Listen, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next episode of And the Question Is. Y'all be blessed.